It is a great honor and a privilege to introduce Rena Quint. We're here in your beautiful home in Jerusalem. And Rena, you are an icon. You really are. You are one of the greatest heroes. And I've had the privilege to know you for many years. And Rena, your story is just, there are no words about your story. It is so special. So if you could just relate a little bit about your background and your family.
I'll try to tell you whatever you like. I think, I don't know if an icon, but because I speak English and because I'm willing to do it, a lot of people have interviewed me throughout the years, and we met in South Africa, where I was invited to speak there. And I went with my grandson with his tzitzit and his kippah on, and we spoke to different kinds of groups, and we didn't know whether it's acceptable to do that in South Africa, but apparently it was, and we did it. He was not in the least bit afraid. My story is different from other stories because I was a child between the ages of 3.5 and 9.5 during the war, and I'm the only survivor of my whole Liechtenstein family. I grew up in a city, I didn't grow up there. I was born in a city called Pietrkov, and Pietrkov is well known because it was a place where many, many books were published, and they had quite a few very important rabbis. I have Rabbi Meir Shapiro's signature on my biological parents' marriage license. He married them. He was the rabbi in the great synagogue in Pietrkov until he left to build Chochmei Lublin. And he built a synagogue there, and of course he got very involved with Daf Yomi. And when he left, Rabbi Lau came in, and he was the rabbi in that same synagogue. They were cousins, and unfortunately, he was the rabbi until the ghetto started, and when the first deportation started, he was able to speak to his people, and probably my parents. I was too young to understand at that time, but he was sent to Treblinka, together with my mother and brothers and most of the people from Pietrkov. So I didn't know him, but in 1981, when I came to Israel, when there was a gathering of Holocaust survivors, I met his two sons who survived. One became the chief rabbi. At that time, he was the rabbi of Netanya, Rabbi Chaim Meir Lau, and the other one is Naftali Lavi. The reason he changed his name to Lavi is he became consul general, and if you become a politician, you have to Hebraicize his name. However, his children, like Benny Lau, who's well known, went back to the name Lau, but he was Lavi, and I met them, and Naftali Lavi was very, very nice to me. And he took me to a Landsmannschaft where there were a lot of people from Pietrkov. I was so anxious to meet them. And somebody took me to a party during that time in 1981. I didn't recognize anybody from our hometown in Pietrkov, and nobody recognized me or knew my family. But at that time was the first time that I was willing to look and acknowledge to myself that I'm a survivor. Before that, I never spoke about it. I was adopted when I was 10, and I had a mother and a father and aunts and uncles, nobody biological, but they were wonderful, wonderful people. And I had a very good childhood. I had a terrible life before, being in the ghetto, a slave labor camp, various concentration camps. I was liberated from Bergen, Belsen, and then sent to Sweden and brought to the United States. And the woman who brought me to the United States died shortly after we came here, and I was adopted by an American childless family, religious, Zionistic, wonderful family, and they brought me up as their own daughter. So my children had grandparents, and my grandchildren had a great-grandmother even. So I'm very different than other. I was just, we just stopped because I had a telephone call, and I feel very, very lucky, especially after this pandemic, that I get calls from people who want to visit, who want to go out, who want me to speak. And I have 22 grandchildren who are very much concerned about me, and 35 great-grandchildren, most of them old enough to call. And I have 3 daughters. Unfortunately, my son just passed away this past year. But I was telling you about, well, I'm talking about Pietrokov, I guess. I lived in a house in Pietrokov. This is my house. You can see it. I know, I was talking about 1991, the gathering, and how I met many people. But in 1984, we made Aliyah, and I started volunteering in Yad Vashem. And in 1989, Yad Vashem had a trip to Poland. I was terrified of going back. I had not talked about it. I knew very little about myself. I don't remember what my mother and father and brothers looked like. But my husband, who was really the best husband in the world, said, let's go. And we went, and I went back to my home. This was the address, 2 Platsternetskigo. You can see the house. In 1989...
You can even see the mezuzah over there.
Yes, that's what I'm trying to show you. You can see the mezuzah still there. Amazing. And the Polish Christian woman who was living in the house was quite surprised about the mezuzah. She had never seen it. I guess if you don't look, you don't have to see it. And we were told that the Polish people would not welcome you into their home. But Poland was very poor in 1989. It was under communism before their election. And we were told we could bribe people very easily by bringing chocolate, coffee, and leather belts and dollar bills. People will do whatever you ask. So that was very easy for us to bring, and we went in, and we met this woman. She remembered my father. And it was a lovely apartment, and in back of where she's sitting, that's me on the side, in the red jacket, and there's the china closet. And I often wonder whether any of those things could have belonged to my mother. I don't want any of them, but I asked if I could buy anything, if she had anything, and she said no, she didn't. I took a picture of the parquet floor because it really was a very nice apartment. And I found a lot of things, but I have this document, which I assume it's a prenuptial agreement. In 1930, I don't know how many people heard of it or would have done it. Rabbi Meir Shapiro married them, but my mother, because she had money and furniture and jewelry and linens, had a lawyer draw a prenuptial agreement, and it was signed by a notary. Whatever she brought into the marriage, if chas v'chalila, the marriage would break up, she would keep what she has and her husband. Unfortunately, they didn't live long enough to have much of a marriage. They had 3 children, and me at the age of 3.5, that's when the ghetto started.
Do you know when you were born? What year?
I do know where I was born now, because I found my birth certificate. Before that, and even now, I use the birthday of a girl who died in Sweden after the war, and her mother had tickets and all the papers she needed to go to the United States. Her brother had been in the States, and he invited Anna Phillips Stahl, her son Sigmund, and her daughter Fanny. While they were waiting to go to the United States, and I was waiting with the orphans to go to Palestine. And the reason I say Palestine is because in 1945 there was no Israel.
It was under the British mandate.
There was under the British mandate, there was the white paper, and anybody who came was sent to Cyprus and then taken to to camps. It was not a good place, but we were going to go there. But this little girl, Anna's daughter, who was 9.5 years old, she died. And her mother had tickets and all the visas and passports, and she asked me if I want to be her daughter and come with her to the United States. And of course, she was my 5th mother. I had several others, which I'll tell you about. And I wanted very much to be somebody's daughter. So I went to the United States with her, and everything was fine except that she died when we got to the United States shortly after. And then I was adopted by another family. But before I tell you, so I have that birthday. So now I have 2 birthdays, because in 1989 I found my real birthday.
And what year were you born?
I was born really in 1935, but the birthday that I used that belonged to Fanny is 1936. It's only 2 months different, from December to February, but the year was different, and it was not easy finding it. We went to the Hall of Records, and I hired a woman, because I don't speak Polish. Yiddish may have been the language I spoke, and that was the language in the camps. And she said, give me your American passport and I'll find it. I said, I'll be glad to give you my American passport, but the name in my passport has no similarity. Rena Quint has nothing to do with Fredja Lichtenstein. My birthday, I said 1936, but here, that's not it. My mother's name is not the same. The country that I was born in, not the same. It sort of sounds queer. You're looking for your passport, you're looking for your birth certificate, but nothing matches it.
Rena, can I ask, this lady that you went to see in your home, did she explain how she acquired the home?
Yes, she did. She said in 1942, when all the Jews were rounded up, we were rounded up and taken to the synagogue, and from there, those people went to Treblinka, but I managed to run away. And when the ghetto was emptied out and the apartments available, the Christians were able to move into those apartments. So she moved into that apartment, and I have the deed that my mother bought the apartment, but I can't get it because first it belonged to my mother, and then it was taken over by the Germans, then it was taken over by the Russians, by the Polish people, and then privately. And if I could prove all the people who had owned the apartment and all the governments, then I would have to pay taxes from 1936. And you know what? I don't want the apartment, I don't want to pay the taxes. But she moved in there. And of course, probably the furniture, because what happened is that one day, my father had been taken away to a slave labor factory. He and other able-bodied people. And one night there was banging down at the door, and Ukrainian and German soldiers came in and started yelling, "Rouse, rouse, you've got 5 minutes to get out. Take whatever you need and get out." What would you take? Some people took food, money, bedding, the baby, the old grandmother, whatever, and we ran down these terrible stairs. And if somebody fell, other people fall on top of them, until we got, these are the stairs. I have a bigger picture of really terrible stairs, and I don't know what my mother took, but it really didn't matter at the end. We were brought into this big square, and from there we were herded like animals, being beaten and chased, until we got to this great synagogue. You see the picture, and you can see me looking up at the Magen David, the Star of David there. There are no Jews left in Pietrkov, so there's no need for a synagogue. So the synagogue is now a library. And you can see me speaking to Maria and her friend who lived in Pietrkov around the books. But that door in the back of the library, which used to be the synagogue, was very important. By this time I was 6 years old, and the ghetto was being liquidated, and we were brought into the synagogue. And 2,000 people couldn't get into the synagogue, so there was a little house, like a shtibel, next to it, where people used to learn. And the people who couldn't get in there were taken out into the Rocco forest, and they had to dig ditches which became their graves and shot in there. I was in the synagogue, and you can see me looking. If you ask the librarian to pull open the curtains, you can see that there is a thing with writing in Hebrew.
Is that the Luchot?
That is the Luchot, and here's a bigger picture of it, and that is the front of the Aron Kodesh, of the Ark where the Torah is. Now you can see bullet holes in there. Those bullet holes people were being shot all the time. I was holding on to my mother, I'm quite sure. I don't have any documents proving this, but I'm sure a 6-year-old who must be terrified. And my 2 brothers, Jesse and David, must have been holding on to my mother. And I'm sure my mother must have been holding on tightly to me. Behind that door there was a man, and he beckoned to me and he said, "Run." I must have been very stupid. I must have had no seichel, no brains. How do you run when people are being shot? Somehow or other I got the courage. Maybe my mother pushed me, maybe God pushed me. I don't know how it happened. I ran out. They easily could have shot me. They could have bopped me over the head. They could have pushed me back. Somehow or other they didn't see. There was such pandemonium, such chaos, that maybe where would a 6-year-old girl be running? I ran out of that door. That was the last time I saw my mother and my brothers and the rest of all those people. They were put into those terrible cattle cars and taken to Treblinka, which was one of the 6 extermination camps. And I always think of what my mother was thinking of that last trip. Was she thinking of her 2 boys that she was taking to an unknown destination? Was she thinking of her little girl that went into such a dangerous neighborhood? I hope she's looking down to see that I'm living in Israel, that I have a family, that I love living in this land that belongs to the Jewish people. I hope she's looking down and seeing that at least one person in the family, and because of me, we have children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, and hopefully will keep on growing, and her name and my father's name has been upheld. They were all, I ran away, but they were taken to Treblinka, and if you go to Treblinka now, there are 17,000 stones to remember 800,000 people who were murdered in Treblinka. And some of those stones, the bigger cities, have their name on them. And this is the name of Pietrikov, where Rabbi Lau was the main, the rabbi, and his son became the chief rabbi of Israel, and now his grandson, Rabbi David Lau, is the rabbi. This man took me to my father. What was my father supposed to do with me? Girls were useless. Boys under the age of 10 were also, nobody cared about them. But boys could work. The girls they would just shoot and get rid of. But the boys they were taken. When this man took me to my father said, "We have to take a talk." And he said, "From now on, you're not this little girl. You're a big boy. You're a boy of 10, and your name is not Fredja, it's Froim. Froim like Ephraim." And I had to learn to speak in the grammar of a boy. I had to learn to be careful going to the bathroom. I worked very hard. It's a glass factory. We brought water. Rabbi Lau was one of the people also, and Naftali Levi. They worked in the glass factory also, although I don't remember them. I don't remember anybody. And we got little sips of water for the men, so I don't think the Germans cared about them drinking. But if they would faint, they couldn't work. Their whole purpose was to get them to work and produce. And then they needed water to put the blown glass into, molten glass. More than anything, they had these big German shepherd dogs. And every time one of those dogs would sick somebody and take a bite out of their arm, it was like a death sentence, because if you couldn't pick up your arm to work. They would shoot you. If you couldn't work, you were useless. If it got, there were no bandages, there was no antibiotic. If it got infected, too bad. You'd be shot. People were afraid of even showing that they had anything wrong because they tried to work so that they would stay alive. But one day, with all the terrible things that were happening, and I must tell you, to me, the men were very good. The men tried to hide me, the men tried to help me. Later on, the women did. I must tell you that very often you think of people in the concentration camps of being out for themselves. That was not the case with me. People always helped me all my life. Every time I needed somebody, God sent an angel. And I had 6 mothers, and each one of them was like an angel that was sent by God. And then when they finished taking care of me, somehow or other they were killed, they were taken away, they died. I had 6 different mothers. I am sure that they were angels sent by God. While working in the factory and trying very hard, the Allies, meaning the Americans, the British, and the Russians, were getting closer. And so the Germans wanted to hide everything that had happened. And so they again brought these terrible cattle cars, and we were marched to the Umschlagplatz, and we had to get onto these. And as you see, they don't even have ramps or stairs. So everybody had to push everybody else onto those cramps. 80 to 100 people would be put into a car like that. There was nothing to eat there. There was nothing to drink. There was one toilet for 80 to 100 people. You can imagine. Everybody just took care of their needs. The whole pail just swept over. The place stank. It was, I don't know how anybody was able to breathe. And some people couldn't. There were a lot of people who died on the way. People got sick. People went crazy. I did a lot of research when I wrote a book called A Daughter of Many Mothers with Barbara Sofer. She helped me find a lot of things, and there's a man in Poland who's very good with computers, and he found a lot of things. Besides my birth certificate, I have my brother's birth certificates, my parents' marriage license, a lot of things. And I also found this schedule, which shows you that my father and his brother, whose name was Lichtenstein, were on the same transport as the Laos, because their names started in L. It was alphabetical. And I found the card that my father had to fill out, or was filled out for him, when he got to Buchenwald. Now, I don't know when I got to Bergen-Belsen, because Bergen-Belsen was completely burnt down. I'll show you the barracks that were burned down. But I imagine that if he got to Buchenwald, what happened is that we were on those trains, and when we crossed the border from Poland to Germany, the doors were open, and we had to jump down, and we used the snow. It was always snowing. I know that's not true. I've been to Poland where it's spring and summer. But during the time that I was incarcerated with the Germans, all I remembered being freezing cold. I don't remember spring and summer. We jumped down, and we used the snow to eat it, and we used the snow to drink it. And we used the light to look around to see who was still there, because there were 2 other camps. Ours was a glass camp. There was one for woodworking and one of tanning of leather. And while we were getting used to this, German soldiers on motorcycles, 2, one drive and one on the side, came and made an announcement saying, we're being taken to camps. Men on one side, women on the other. My father realized I couldn't go with him to a camp, because when you go into a camp, the first thing you have to do is get undressed to go into the showers. Why did the Germans care about you going into the showers? Well, first of all, they were clean, and we were filthy, and we were carriers of lice and fleas and feces all around us and smells that were impossible. They didn't want to be around people like that. That was one reason. Another is, if you happen to have a ring, a diamond, money, jewelry, maybe you could hide it someplace. If you're naked, there's no place to hide anything. Germans were very clever. Many of the things that they did, they were awful, they were mean, they were miserable, but smart. And he met a school teacher. My father met this woman, and he asked her if she would keep an eye on me. I was 6 years old, 6.5 years old maybe. My father promised that the war would be over very soon, and he would meet me in our hometown in Piotrków. I believed him because fathers are supposed to keep their promises, but my father didn't keep his promise. I never saw him again. And with all the research that I did and my adopted parents did and various organizations did, we never found any trace of him. So the last I saw was that he got to Buchenwald. Whether he died in Buchenwald, whether he was shot in Buchenwald, whether he was sent to another, I don't know anything about that. We were marching to Bergen-Belsen in the snow, and we were on the mountain, and down below there were two men lying in the snow with their pants down. I didn't understand what was happening, but all the women were talking about it, and I got glimpses of what I heard, but I really didn't understand. If a Jewish man ran away, because he was circumcised, he was recognized as a Jew. A woman had a better chance if she ran away. Maybe she could pretend to be a Christian. But a man, if he had a Brit Milah, that was a definite sign. You think you're going to fool us? We know who you are, said the Germans. I didn't understand, but the women were all talking about this. And finally, when we got to Bergen-Belsen, just the way my father predicted, we had to get undressed and leave all our things. But my father had given me these pictures of my mother and father and brothers, and I was holding them in my hand. And one of the soldiers thought that I was hiding something. He pried open my hand, was very disappointed. It was pictures, tore them up and threw them away. I have no way, I don't know what my mother looked like, or my father, or my brothers. What color eyes did they have? What color hair? Were they tall? Were they short? What they did? What their blood? Nothing. I know nothing about them at all. This woman really was like a mother to me for a very short time. I don't know what happened to her. But when we came out of the showers, she stole a black coat that was lying there from somebody else. And she kept the coat around us. And each one of us had gotten some sort of rag to put on. And every 5 or 6 women would get a blanket. Between the coat and her body heat, I had some warmth because it was so freezing cold there all the time. Every day, the most important thing in Bergen-Belsen was food. And the food we got was soup that smelled like garbage, because it was made out of garbage, old potato peels, anything that you can imagine that would be thrown out. Sometimes people would say, I couldn't taste that soup. But after not eating for a day, that soup was so delicious. You either had that or you had nothing. So you were very, very happy to get that food. Every day, hundreds of people died, and the women would take their blankets, put a body into the blanket, and pull it out, and put it someplace, any place around in Bergen-Belsen. Every place you went, you would find bodies lying around, naked bodies. In Auschwitz, you smelled gas. In Bergen-Belsen, you smelled death all the time. The toilets were impossible to get to, and there was a big pit outside. You were terrified of going there, because if you'd fall into that pit, do you know what it would mean? So they had like pots going around. It was impossible. One day, I was very sick with typhus and diphtheria. How do I know this? Because I have a chart from the hospital in Sweden. which Barbara, the woman who co-authored my book, found. The temperature chart, and they had typhus, diphtheria, and some other disease with the lungs. I don't know how any child could possibly survived all these different things, but I did. I'm here to tell the story. I don't know how, but I did. One day there was a lot of commotion. I was very sick with typhus. Everybody was sick. And some women must have taken me outside. It was better to be outside under the trees than in the stinking, horrible barracks. And I found myself lying there on with the dead bodies. And something happened that day. An army soldiers wearing different clothes and speaking a foreign language came in. They were the British. And the bullhorns, they made an announcement. We are the British Army. We have come to free you. You're free. You're free. You can do whatever you want. What do I want to do? I can't move. When you have typhus, you can't see, you can't hear. I was on these bodies. But these women found some old cups. You use those cups for anything, like pots. And they found some old potato peels. And they started eating and behaving like them. Typhus was all over, and there were signs saying, for the army, go slowly because you don't want it to go on. And they brought more bodies out. And then the British tried to feed people. 14,000 people died, 2,000 according to the British because they gave them the wrong food. When you haven't eaten for such a long time, you can't have a sandwich of meat or something like that. You have to be very, very slow. Even bread you have to eat slowly. They learned very quickly. They tried to feed the people, and then they took people like me on a stretcher, people who were very sick, and then they burned down all the barracks, which means there was nothing left. The Germans burned down many of the barracks with records, and then the British burned down the rest, just to get rid of all the excrement and all the smells and all the terrible lice and fleas. There was nothing left. And then they made these huge graves, and they buried 10,000 people. You're supposed to have a little bit of decorum, a little bit of feeling when you bury somebody, but you can't. You have to bury so many bodies. They used even the Germans and other people and bulldozers to bury as many, to get rid of the smells and infectious diseases. And then because I was one of the lucky ones, Sweden had opened its doors to 6,000 survivors. And I was one of them. And they took me to Sweden, and I have exact record I was taken to Lubeck and from there to Stockholm, and the first DP camp, which was called Bjard. And because I was still very, very sick, I was taken to a hospital in Hasselholm, and there a Christian family came to visit me, and they wanted to adopt me. And they brought me candy, and they brought me a doll, and I wanted very much to go with them. But the people around me said that I should go to Palestine because I was Jewish. I didn't know what it meant to be Jewish. I don't remember my mother having Shabbat or Passover or learning how to say Shema Yisrael. I don't remember any of that as a little girl. But they said I should go with the other orphans to Palestine. So I went to a different camp, and that was called Tinskrid. And there I met another mother. I'm always meeting mothers. Her mother, I don't know if I'm meeting them or if they're meeting me, but God arranged these shidduchim for me, I'm sure. And Anna had a son, Sigmund, and a daughter, Fanny. And her brother had been in the United States, and he sent her tickets and papers that he would be taking care of her, affidavits, while they were waiting for their ship to go to the United States, and I was waiting to go to Palestine. This little girl, Fanny, 9.5, died. Her mother quickly realized that if her daughter died, she wanted a daughter. And I had the luck, and she asked me if I want to be her daughter, and she took me to the United States. So now my name is Fanny, and I'm 9 years old. This is a picture of me in Sweden with a dog tag with some of the other children.
So which one are you in the picture?
I am right here on the bottom.
On the bottom. And how old are you now at this?
I'm 9.
You're 9.
I'm 9 years old, and I've got the birthday of Fanny. And I know a lot of this now because in 1981, that I told you about before, I wrote to the, nobody recognized me and I didn't recognize anybody. So I wrote to the International Tracing Bureau, which is an amazing place. And they wrote to me exactly my name, when I was born in Pietrków, that I was Polish, that I was Jewish, my parents' names, last known address was at Pietrków, they didn't have a name, that I was in Camp Bergen, Belsen, at a date not indicated because everything was burned down, that I was evacuated there to Sweden aboard the ship Castleholm. I have all these details even on the 25th of July, 1945. And they found this when they just said a DP card, displaced persons card. They said that I was in the ghetto, in Częstochowa. A lot of information.
In Częstochowa?
Yeah. Here you can see it.
You were in Częstochowa as well?
I don't know if I was there. I don't remember being there, but they say I was.
And this was from the Red Cross?
International Tracing Bureau, yes. Yes. I can just tell you that this is what they say. I don't remember that. Other people tell me that the women went to Ravensbrück. I'm not on that list. I'm also not on the list in the ghetto. I think because children weren't placed. But I found my mother and father there. My brothers were not placed in the ghetto either. So that doesn't mean we weren't there. And then it said that I went to the United States, but I'm here. How I got from Bergen-Belsen, I found my name in Bergen-Belsen. I have been back to Bergen-Belsen. The people from the lower Saxony who run Bergen-Belsen invited survivors to come down there. They built a new museum, and they have a lot of books, and I have 2 books of the survivors of Bergen-Belsen, and so I have proof that I was there. But how did I survive it? What happened there? I know I got out of there by going to Sweden, but there's so many. I was in Pietrków and I was in Bergen-Belsen. Where was in between? Was it Częstochowa, where the men were, which could have been with my father, or was it Ravensbrück, where the women were? I'm not in either place. Maybe I was hiding all the time. I don't know. I just don't know. Actually, Barbara, the woman who helped me write the book, when I kept on saying, I don't know this and I don't know that, took me to a psychiatrist at AMCHA. And AMCHA is an organization that works with Holocaust survivors, psychological. And I told her my story, and she says, Rena, you remember enough. And what you don't remember, you don't have to. You don't have to go in and open up a Pandora's box that will tell you all these things that were so terrible that your brain forgot them, and that's okay.
And Rena, can I ask, going back to Bergen-Belsen, it must have been extremely, extremely difficult and very emotional.
I guess it was, but I survived it. A few weeks ago I was asked to speak, and this woman, and I sold my book. But many of the people didn't have any money because it was in a neighbor's house. And I said, take it, and when you get a chance, come, and you'll pay me. And she came over and she says, when I listened to you, I was amazed because it was the first Holocaust survivor who didn't make me feel sad. So I said to her, wasn't it sad when I told you that I never saw my mother again? She said, yes, but you went on. I said, wasn't it sad when I told you I never saw my father again? She says, yes, but you went on. And she says, everything that happened to you, you just went on. Like it just happened, and then you go on to the next thing. And she says, I'm trying to learn that, because some people just get stuck in what is terrible and they can't move on. And you had all these things that should have made you feel, like you said, Bergen-Belsen was impossible. And having typhus and having diphtheria without medicine, even with medicine, it's impossible.
It's a miracle. It's a miracle that
It's
you
a
survived.
miracle. It's a miracle that I'm alive. And my husband wrote me notes every day saying to that. And he assured me every single day that God saved me for him. And he really made me believe that. And I am sure that God did save me. I don't know exactly why me and not my brothers, not my parents, not 1.5 million other children, but there's no way that I can tell you that I could have survived. How could a 6-year-old run out of a synagogue when the bullets are flying? And if I ran out, why didn't my brothers run out? Why didn't other people run out? I don't have any answers to that. All I know is that I am here, which is amazing. And my grandson, who's a rabbi, went to the synagogue in Petrikov, and he took a group with him, and he said he has to make a prayer because a miracle happened to him in this place. Now, he wasn't born. He's only 30, like one or something like that now. And so he said, how was it born? Because his grandmother escaped, his mother was born. And because his mother was born, he was born. And because he was born, he was able to have 5 Jewish children. And that's true. It was just a miracle, and maybe I was born for him or his children or my other grandchildren. I don't know.
Rena, in one of the talks, you mentioned that you were at a funeral in America.
Yes.
And you couldn't believe that people were crying over one person that was being buried.
Right.
It left such a profound impression on me.
Well, what happened is that I came with Anna to America, and we were there for a short time, and we went up to the mountains for the summer, and she disappeared. And apparently what happened is that she was very sick, and she was taken to Lenox Hill Hospital in Manhattan. And a few days later, her family came for me and her son, Sigmund, and they took us to a place which now I know was Farmingdale, which was a cemetery. And there was one hole, and I didn't know what it was. And they were burying Anna, one person in one hole. Now, I had been to Bergen-Belsen. I showed you pictures where there are hundreds and thousands of people lying around dead, and nobody's crying. Just pull out the body from the barracks and throw them down on the ground. And here one person died, and everybody was weeping and crying and using their handkerchiefs. And I didn't understand that you're supposed to cry over a funeral. And I didn't know what it meant to bury one person. It was just something that I had not known about. And I didn't cry, and maybe they thought that I didn't love Anna. I did. I just didn't understand what was happening. It was the first funeral that I had ever gone to. I had seen many, many dead people, but never at a funeral. But after the funeral, we went to sit Shiva, and the family that brought Anna over, they brought over a woman who was going to take care of her daughter. And now that she was dead, they really didn't want me. And there was a lot of talk, I guess, and somebody knew a family in Brooklyn, New York, who had no children. And they called them, and they asked if they'd like to meet a little Holocaust orphan. And I was invited there for Shabbat. And they became my parents, and I was almost 10 years old. They were 46. They weren't young. But my mother lived till she was 100, and she was my mother, and she was my children's grandmother, and my grandchildren's great-grandmother, and she was with us all the time, and she gave me a life. But of course, at the end of her life, when she needed help, because she lived till 100, we were there for her. So I never thought about it until somebody pointed out that had she not adopted me, she wouldn't have all these grandchildren and great-grandchildren.
And you were present at her funeral?
Of course, she was.
And you cried at her funeral?
I certainly did. And so did my husband and my 4 children and grandchildren. Everybody did. And we we know her yurtzeit, and she died the last day of Hanukkah. But I don't think of her death so much because she had a full life. She was 100 years old, and the paintings that you see around, she's the one who painted them. And she spent every Shabbat with us, and we spent it with her, and she and her husband.
Beautiful paintings.
Yeah.
Very, very beautiful.
Yeah. She started painting because the second year I was with them, they couldn't afford to send me to camp, and they had a friend who was an artist. So she thought, why doesn't he teach me how to paint? Well, I had no talent and no interest in it, but she painted to keep me company, and she got interested in it. So at the age of 50, I guess, she started painting. And for 50 years she painted, and I've got a whole house full of painting, and so do my children. And she wrote 7 books, and she has 1 book of children's paintings and poems that she wrote about it. And I have her picture all around also. There's a picture right here. Here she is.
What a special lady.
That's a special lady, and that is my father. He died in 1971, 30 years before she did. Yeah. And I have a picture here of my family. This was a long time ago, where they were the Dor Hamshach, the future of that Yad Vashem had them. And this is a picture where I came, where I found my birth certificate. And when I came on the bus to Yad Vashem, everybody was so excited. And Yad Vashem people, they said they hear so many stories, but somehow or other, it meant something that I found my birth certificate to them. I have a lot of different stories.
So, Rena, you have a very amazing story. When you were invited to South Africa, you were in Durban, and you were invited to a prison.
Yes. So I'm glad you asked me about that. When I was invited to a prison, my husband had gotten sick at that time, so I didn't want to go. But my family said, you have to go, they're expecting you. And my grandson, his name is Boaz, and you can see him here with his kippah, a skull cap, and his tzitzit. And this black man is he's the chief, he's the head of the correctional facility in Durban. And he heard me on the radio, and he invited me to come to speak to his prisoners. Why would he want me to speak to his prisoners? And he said he heard my story, and he felt that a woman who had gone through such terrible things and still made a good life for herself, and I really had a very good life. I had a good education, I had music lessons, I had a wonderful husband and wonderful children, and I really had a very, very good life. And he said, when people go to prison, when they come out, they have very low expectations. People don't want to give them jobs, people don't want to rent apartments to them, people don't want to marry them. And they wanted me to tell them that as bad as things are, you can always hope to improve yourself. And that was the message I was supposed to give them. So I spoke in English, and he spoke in Swahili, and somehow
Zulu,
we managed.
most probably Zulu.
Yeah.
But I was very fortunate to be at Yom HaShoah in the West Park, where they have annual Yom HaShoah ceremony.
1,500 people, I think.
And you were the guest speaker, and I actually managed to video it, and I think, thank God, we have that video of you addressing the crowd.
Well, the story didn't change very much.
But that was 2013, 8 years ago.
Yeah.
And I remember it like yesterday. I remember it.
Yeah.
So, Rena, can I just ask you what you've gone through? I mean, it's just, there are no words. But, Rena, can I just ask, did you...
I'm sorry, can you just do this?
So, this is a copy of your birth certificate.
This is a copy of my birth certificate that I had to pay for this. I had to pay a lot of money, they said. It was 26 cents. Can you imagine, in Poland at that time? But this shows you, my name was Fredja Lichtenstein, and my father's name was Isaac Lichtenstein, and my mother's name was Sura Messer Lichtenstein. And I got this in 1989-05. That's May 24th. That's not, we just finished it, my goodness, in 1989. And I have this, and this is stamped to prove it. And then I also found my brother's birth certificates and my parents' marriage license and the deed to my mother's house. And she also had a store. And my grandparents lived not far. I found all these things. All it does is proves that I'm here. I don't know if it proves anything else.
And Rena, what you've gone through, in all what you saw and seeing so many bodies and so much unimaginable horrors, there are no words to describe the horrors that you witnessed and you saw. Did you always keep your emunah?
When you say that I always keep it, I'm not sure. As a child I knew what emunah was, and I didn't know what God or religion was. I didn't know that I was Jewish. I didn't know any of that. I thought that the way I lived, the way people just lived and died, and the way people got sick, and the way everybody had lice, and how everybody was cold, I thought that was normal. Maybe as a child it was easier than somebody who came from a place to know what life was beforehand, because I didn't remember that. And when I came to the United States, I started learning English. I had to learn to speak English. I had to learn to read English. I had to learn to tie my shoelaces. I had to learn to play with toys. And I got so involved and so busy that I just didn't want to think about the past. And every once in a while, when a bad dream would come, I would sort of say to myself, that's a bad dream. It's not happening now. And I really had a good life. And as I said, my married life was just wonderful. And my husband always made me feel as if God saved me for him. And I believe that. And having 4 children and having a mother and father and aunts and uncles. My children had grandparents. Most survivors don't have the luxury of having aunts and uncles and cousins. None of them were biological, but they were very good relatives. So I have them, and my children have them.
But you've always believed in Hashem, and
when you say always, when I was adopted by an American Jewish believing couple, then I learned to believe Hashem.
So they had a profound influence on you.
Absolutely. I guess they had the biggest influence. Very often you think of which is more important, the heredity, the people that gave me life, biological life, or the people who raised me and gave me the life that was. Had I been adopted by a Christian couple in Sweden, I could have been a good Christian woman now.
It's all min hashemayim. It's all
min hashemayim. Right.
And Rena, what message do you give to your children, your grandchildren, and your grandchildren, and to the future generations?
I think you have to love as much as we can. I think we have to live life to the fullest. When my husband retired very early, he was a very successful lawyer, thank God, and he was a rabbi. He had smicha, and we wanted to come to Israel. He wanted more than I even, and every time we came on vacation, he wanted to buy an apartment. And finally, my mother was at a party, and she heard about this apartment, which is in a good neighborhood, and it's big, and you can have American appliances, and she called up, and he just bought it on the phone, because it sounded perfect. And then we came the next day, and he looked at it, he says, great, and then he went back to the States, because he was working on a big case, and left me to be the lawyer. Now, I know nothing about being a lawyer, so every 5 minutes I would call him, we got a lawyer. And the lawyer was busy, and every time the lawyer asked me a question I didn't know, I'd call my husband, and they didn't have iPhones the way they do now, so I just dialed it. He told me what to do. Then once we had the house, he just gave up his law practice and came here. We went back a few times because many of his clients wanted him. And then when he sort of finished, he became a Rosh Kollel here. And he wrote 17 books, which I can show you. Each one of them is inscribed to me. He took from all Tehillim, from the Psalms, and from the different prophets. And we really did life to the fullest. We traveled a great deal. We went to China, to Hong Kong. Every time we went to Paris and to Spain. We went all over. We went to shows, we went to music. We really, really lived a very full life. He used to teach a Gemara class in our house, and we had 50 and 60 people here every Thursday night. And then he taught a kollel on Monday and Thursday for men. The other class was there. And I started working in Yad Vashem. And first I was a guide. And then in 1989, when I came back with all this and people asked me to speak about it, I started giving testimony. And I've been giving testimony since 1989, both in Yad Vashem. Unfortunately, the past year with the corona, everything stopped. But I was on Zoom. Yesterday I spoke to India, which before was Istanbul, and I spoke to Dubai, and I speak to high school groups and many of the colleges and law schools. So everything was done on Zoom, and I'm hoping now we'll get back to being with people.
Birthright came.
Birthright came, and the first Birthright, they asked me, and they came to my home. And they were a wonderful group, and 4 of the youngsters asked if I could be their grandmother. So life is going on.
And Rena, did you ever speak to your children about your experiences when they were growing up?
I don't think my children were so interested. My grandchildren are very interested. But in America, people didn't talk about it. Until the Eichmann trial, nobody wanted to talk about it. And survivors were made to feel guilty. In America, they were called greeners. And in Israel, they felt, why would you have gone like sheep to slaughter, was the expression. And until one day, I tell the story of Moshe Dayan. There was a terrorist incident in Maalot, and there was a high school of 120 students and 10 teachers and 3 terrorists. And they had the guns, and they had things. And Moshe Dayan came with the army, and it was the first time he realized how hard it is. Because if he would shoot at the terrorists, how many other children would be killed, until they finally realized what they had to do. But before that, he just felt, why didn't you fight? Why didn't you fight? And it was not easy to fight. The Germans had the guns, the Germans had all the ammunition, they had the power. When they came into Poland, the Polish army was completely unprepared. And Germany took over very, very quickly.
You know, it took the Germans more time to destroy the Warsaw Ghetto than to conquer the whole of Poland.
Well, there were people in the Warsaw Ghetto who fought. And there are wonderful stories that have come out of there. Mordechai Analevich, who was their leader, was killed. But Antok Zuckerman, who was his deputy, he did survive, and he came with his wife and built Chochmei Lublin. And one of the story he tells is, when I used to come out of the Children's Memorial, I told this story because I think it's amazing. People used to ask him for favors all the time. And big favors like an extra piece of bread or a place to live or medicine. One day a 6-year-old little boy came and asked for a favor. And Antok Zuckerman said, what kind of favor would this little child want? And the little boy said, I have a violin. I love to play the violin. My violin teacher was taken away. Could you find a teacher for me? Antok Zuckerman sort of thought, he has to do something. And he found a teacher. After the war, he met the teacher, and he said, what happened to that little boy who wanted so much and you were going to teach him? And the teacher said, you know what? Had he lived, the whole world would have known about him, because he was such a genius. He was such a prodigy. And now Dr. Zuckerman says, how many violinists, how many cellists, how many doctors, how many dentists, how many teachers did we lose? 1.5 million children who would have been a violinist. Or, yeah.
That is a beautiful message. It really is. So, Rena, I just want to thank you so much. Rena, I really must mention that not only are you an icon, which you are, but you are incredible. There's no words. You are a living legend. You really are, Rena. You are it's just, every time I've ever heard you speak, and I've heard you speak many times, it's so inspiring, and you are such an example for all of us to just look up to, and to be so we are so grateful that Hashem spared you, and that you built up a family, and you are such an example we can all try to emulate. You really are amazing.
Thank you.
And this book, A Daughter of Many Mothers, I was very fortunate to be at the launch of the book. Rena Quint with Barbara Sofa, her horrific childhood and wonderful life. And you really have had a wonderful life,
Yes.
but you did have a horrific childhood.
Yes.
And look how you look at the glass half full, not
Yes.
half empty. And you are such an inspiration to all of us.
Thank
So you should just have mazel and bracha and
Thank you.
continue. You are really a true heroine of Israel, and
Thank
we are so grateful to have you, and you should just be well and have mazel and bracha and all of Hashem's
Amen,
blessings.
and the same to you. I don't know if you were able to see this picture. I should have turned it of this digital picture that we have here. Those
Yeah.
are children, my children and grandchildren, and it keeps on going all the time, so that I see them in my home all through. Each one of them is a
And
different
Rena,
child.
isn't this the best revenge?
Yes, yes. So that's Tehillah, and each one of them.
Oh, it's so
And that's
beautiful.
each one. Okay.
So,
if
Rena,
you turn
thank you so
around,
much.
You
You
can see
can see-
pictures on my door.
Yeah, this is
Should I
wonderful.
put the light on there?
Please.
Put the light on.
Such a happy home with so many wonderful
I
photographs
have
and
pictures
memories.
all over. None from the ancient. The only one that I have, my earliest one. The earliest one is here, on top there, and then the rest are of my husband when he was a little boy with his mother, and the rest are all current of my wonderful children with their
That's
weddings
wonderful.
and
And here it's with Rabbi Lau and your...
oh, there's Rabbi Lau right here. This is Rabbi David Lau with my grandson getting smicha. Now would you imagine the grandson of Rabbi Lau from Pietrogov and the grandson of Rena Quint from Yerushalayim.
And both got smicha.
Both, yeah, well, yes. And this is Rabbi Lau, his father, who was the son.
So I remember your husband so well. And
Well, my husband is over there, and I've got a lot of pictures of him. There's a nice one of the two of us. Through you here. Can you see that one?
Rena, you should just have only mazel and bracha, and
Amen.
really it's been such an honor and a privilege to hear and to hear your just unbelievable story. Thank you so much.
Okay.